Welcome back. All right, the NHL came out, said we're not in expansion mode not too long ago, and they're not looking at expanding, and they're not. They're not. But it's 2025. The odds are eventually the NHL looks to expand. It's a business. And in business, if you're not growing, you're shrinking, right? That kind of thing. So the National Hockey League has recently met with a group from New Orleans, or at least a group looking to bring a team, National Hockey League team, to the city of New Orleans in Louisiana. And it's the latest. It's the latest group to meet with the National Hockey League in New York. There was a group of government and business people from Phoenix who met with the National Hockey League. And the National Hockey League wants to bring back the Coyotes. They moved a team to Utah, sure, but the Coyotes are inactive. And I think they still covet that market, so they know that it's going to have to be a combination of government and business together, something they never had with the Coyotes. They have to have that joint agreement and interest and then go from there. Obviously, you have to have your arena, you have to have all these things in place, but they want to go back to Phoenix or just in Arizona. They would like to get their foothold back there. They still believe that it's a huge market and that with the right ownership and the right team, absolutely could draw and make money. And I know everybody wants to see the whole Arizona thing fall away, and like, not everybody. Let me back up. Most hockey fans, though, believe it's not going to work in Arizona. It hasn't worked there for how long? And going back there would be fruitless. Just an awful idea. But the NHL is still meeting with people from there. And there are other meetings that have been had as well, right? So Bettman previously stated, and this was a league address before the season started. So while he's saying we're not going to look for any expansion right now, we're not in expansion mode, he also said they've had expression of interest from groups in Houston, Atlanta, Cincinnati, Kansas City, and Omaha, Nebraska, which was the one that kind of threw everybody. I still find that one to be interesting. Maybe you could make a hockey team work in Nebraska. Sure, maybe you could. Left out there, of course, is some Canadian locations that Canadian hockey fans would like to see come back, including the team that wore this jersey here. Now, revenues continue to grow, as I mentioned. That's what's making the salary cap go up. And league-wide revenue sharing helps all 32 teams. So basically, the richest teams pay into this, and the teams that make the least amount of money take out of that league-wide revenue sharing model, and it works. So if a team has a rough year, has a rough couple of years, they can tap into that fund, get some of that revenue sharing. If a team has a really, really good year, they pay some into that revenue sharing. The idea being that it'll keep 32 strong NHL teams, which we have right now. The Coyotes were struggling to make money. The debate is whether or not they were making money. They publicly said they were making money. All the books seem to indicate they were actually making money, just not at a level that most other teams in the NHL were. And that's another discussion as well, right? So Houston is the largest market in the U.S. without an NHL team, and the largest market in North America, I would think, other than maybe Mexico City, and Mexico City is not on the list of places where the NHL is looking to expand to. Although, would I be surprised if they try to have a game there? No, I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to have a game there because money, right? Money's important. Atlanta's got two groups that are seeking to have both an arena in place and an NHL team to occupy said arena. The arenas in question are in a very different part of the city than the arena that was there for the Thrashers. And so that's been the discussion point, is you put it in a different part of the city's grown since then, demographics have changed, and so the feeling is Atlanta could be more receptive now. Not that they lost the Thrashers for lack of fan interest. It was, some bumbling ownership moves, and just they lost their arena. So you had to very quickly find a home, and Winnipeg said, we got a home for you, and the Winnipeg Jets returned. So Quebec City has challenges. Right now you have a low Canadian dollar, which the Canadian dollar is always going to be below par with the U.S. anyways. It's very rare that it's up near par or at par with the American dollar. But it means that because you're paying players in American money, it's an issue. The other issue being Quebec City is a small market. It is a small market. It's a smaller market than Winnipeg. We've seen how quickly a knee-jerk reaction can happen when Winnipeg's attendance starts to drop at all. And so there would be that concern around Quebec City as well. And it is a challenge for them. You have to have the $1 billion behind you. Billionaire owners are now a requirement in the National Hockey League. And so you need that if you're Quebec City, and it's a challenge. Now, Hamilton always gets brought up in the comment section, so I will talk about Hamilton a little bit here. First off, I think Toronto would try to veto that if it was coming in. I also think Buffalo would try to veto that if that was coming in. A lot of Buffalo fans cross the border to go down and watch the Sabres, and a Hamilton team would draw attention away from Buffalo, probably a bit away from Toronto too, although not like Toronto's ever going to have a problem filling that building, right? But Hamilton is highly unlikely. And if you look at Hamilton's track record of holding on to teams at the minor league and junior level, it's been a spotty history. I have a lot of Hamilton jerseys, and none of the teams that I have a Hamilton jersey for are currently in Hamilton. So that's an issue right there, and it does mean that if you're the National Hockey League, you're going to take that into consideration, right? Now, looking at other leagues, because it always gets brought up that, hey, why would the NHL look at expansion? They may be trying to get out ahead of other leagues, and yet there are other leagues that are talking about it. There hasn't been an official expansion announcement, but baseball's thinking about it. Baseball looking to add 2 teams, which would bring their total teams to 32 teams, which would make scheduling easier and everything, awesome for them. And it might reverse a bit of a trend. Baseball's seen an erosion of their fan base. I think that they've been trying to, bring in some gimmicks that's going to attach some more youthful eyeballs to their product than what they've had lately. And hopefully they can make the product a little more exciting and fun without ruining the game as it's known. And since baseball is so very traditional, that's a tough call. It's a tough call to make rule changes and change things in the league without basically alienating your fan base. And that's always the balancing act. You don't want to alienate your current fans and trying to go out and get new fans, right? Now, Seattle and Vegas appear to be the teams that are most likely to be added to the National Basketball Association. The NBA looking to expand, 32 teams in total, which would mean a return of the Sonics. Would that negatively impact the Kraken? It shouldn't. But Climate Pledge is not just built for hockey. I do think that when they made the changes they did and they revamped the whole thing, they did have an eye towards bringing the NBA back to the city. Las Vegas. The one thing I wonder with Las Vegas is Vegas works as a market. Would there be too many teams then? Because you've got the Raiders. The A's are going in there. You got a baseball stadium going in. You've got the Golden Knights. And then if you add an NBA team as well, which sport is going to start to have maybe a bit of a drop-off in fan attendance? Because it's a lot of money for tickets for people in Las Vegas and the surrounding area, like Henderson and Summerlin. But I do wonder, like, how much that market can support all 4 leagues. Is it a city that will be able to support all 4 leagues, or will one league suffer should they get an NBA team? And I'm not saying they can't support the NBA. They absolutely will. But there's a limited amount of money people have. And that's something to consider when you're looking at how many teams are already in a city. Now, the NFL is already at 32 teams. So while Major League Baseball and the NBA would be expanding to 32 teams, the NFL has been kind of courting the idea of expanding to 36 teams. And if they do expand further beyond what they already have with 32 teams, they could add teams outside the U.S. Their commissioner not ruling that out. London, England has been talked about. I don't think London, England works. There was an article I was reading too on it that doesn't think London, England would necessarily work for the National Football League. But Toronto's been looked at before. I don't know if Toronto and the NFL works. I don't know what that would do to the CFL team that's currently there. Of course, that's the Canadian Football League. And so, do the Argonauts end up moving? Does the presence of the Argonauts make it less likely they go after an NFL team? It was something that was clearly being thought about when the Buffalo Bills were playing home games in Toronto, just to test that. It felt like it was the NFL testing things out to see how well things could work there. So, 36 teams in the NFL could happen. They're talking about expanding the playoffs. Again, but that's kind of a thing, and I know at some point the NHL is going to look to expand the playoffs because money reasons. I like a league where half of it misses the playoffs. I like 16 out of 32 teams making the playoffs. I think that's kind of perfect. And if they go to 36 teams, I would expect to see an expansion of the playoffs, but I'd rather not. Because I think just having 16 teams in the playoffs and making it so that you have to be a good team to make the playoffs is a good thing. And the idea of teams that are lower down in the standings and don't make that top 16, potentially bumping a team out of that top 16 in a postseason best 2 out of 3 or whatever they do, I'm not a fan of that. Not a fan of that at all. And so that's just me personally. I know that may be an opinion that's not shared by a majority of fans, but that's just me personally. Now, what I would want to see. So if you're going to make me commissioner, you're going to say, okay, so you're overseeing this. You're going to bring the league to 36 teams. Quebec and Houston would be the first two that I'd bring in. Those would be teams 33 and 34. I'd bring in Quebec City. I think it would be a good way for the National Hockey League to show, you know what, we're going to give this market another chance. There'd have to be some caveats in there. There'd have to be, a requirement for, say, 5 years of guaranteed sellouts kind of thing. So that you have those first 5 years where you're not worried about attendance. So similar to other teams have done this as well, right? You have your season ticket drive and have to sell a certain amount of tickets. I know, for instance, just here in Abbotsford, and this is AHL, it was a 3-year commitment for Abbotsford Canuck tickets. And then they jacked up the prices for the Abbotsford season tickets, and now the Abbotsford Arena, there's some open seats. If you want to go to an Abbotsford Canucks game, you can probably get in because they and there's other things too connected to Abbotsford. At some point in time, I will be making a video on that. But then if you're going to go to 35 and 36, and I'll explain this, that's where I would bring Phoenix in. Look, they're inactive. They're still technically part of the National Hockey League. That's where I think you bring them in, and I personally would bring in Hartford. I would. Now, here's where it's tricky. I understand why the NHL's not looking at Hartford. They moved out of Hartford to Carolina. That arena does not work. They do not currently have a new arena that would necessarily be any better than what they had before. And so while the governor of Connecticut openly talked about bringing a team to Hartford, I know there's interest locally to bringing a team back to Hartford. I don't think it's going to happen. But if it was me personally, yeah, I'd love to see the Hartford Whalers come back. I do miss the Whalers. Just like I miss the Nordiques as well. But for money purposes, a second Toronto team would work. Now, the Toronto Maple Leafs wouldn't allow it. I think there's other teams, too, that might look down their nose at it. But we've got cities where there's more than one team in various leagues around North America, and it works. And hockey is so wildly popular, and Toronto is a very big city, it absolutely would work. And you could have an arena in the city of Toronto that'd still be about a 3-hour drive away from the other Toronto arena because traffic in Toronto's bad. But at any rate, that's what the NHL would do, I think, for money purposes if that opportunity arose. That being said, I don't think we'll ever see a second team in Toronto for veto reasons and various other reasons. And then one of the things the NHL always says is basically along the lines of they want to create new fans, and you're not going to create new fans putting a second team in Toronto. Even though it would generate a ton of money, they want to create new fans and look into markets that they aren't in or markets they feel like are untapped markets. And to them, they still view Phoenix and just Arizona in general as an untapped market. Houston, obviously, huge market. For me personally, Quebec City. I think where they're going to go, and I've talked about this in previous videos, I think Phoenix eventually comes in. I think Atlanta's getting a team because there's a lot of money behind those bids. I think that we will see a team. So we'll have Houston, Atlanta. I think that we do get a team back in Arizona because you kind of have to. And I would love to see Quebec City get a team. I would love to see that. But I do think that I could see Kansas City getting in. Kansas City's had an NHL-ready arena for a long time. They just haven't had an NHL team to put in there. It's there. Now, one thing to keep an eye on. So the NHL, we're not expanding. One thing to keep an eye on. They have the collective bargaining agreement that they want to get done. They want this salted away. Bettman wants to announce basically at the Stanley Cup final when they do the State of the Union kind of thing with the NHL that the new CBA's been signed. What about the expansion money? All of the expansion fees go to the National Hockey League. If the NHL doesn't fight to keep the expansion revenues all for themselves, then maybe they're not going to expand anytime soon. Maybe they're not worried about it. But if we see them keep all the expansion revenues for themselves, and if when the players ask, and I'm sure the players will at least inquire, if the answer is no, we're not negotiating that, that would indicate that we're going to see expansion soon enough that the owners are very interested in maintaining all of the expansion revenues to split amongst themselves. The rumor has been it's going to be $1 billion plus US for an expansion team, and that the expansion money that they're looking to generate has scared off some owners, at least for now, left them feeling like they're asking for way too much, way above market value. And the NHL may very well be waiting for the market value to come up so they can still get their money, and maybe they're not willing to take less. So that may very well be where we're at right now. Not that the NHL is going to tell us anything other than we're not in expansion mode right now, but it's a matter of when. So look for the CBA when that gets negotiated. If the players get a share of that money, we're probably not going to see expansion. Because the owners going, well, we're not expanding anyways. Sure, we'll give up, a certain portion of the expansion monies because we're not expanding. But if they are, they're probably going to hold on to that money pretty tight. So anyways, let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.